I'm being joined today by independent journalist writing for The Canary, and he's also written for International History Review, Jacobin Magazine, and Columbia Reports. I'm joined by John McEvoy. Hi, John. How are you?
Hi, Gordon. Very well, thanks. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Now, John's just come back from Venezuela, haven't you, John? And clear something up for me, mate, because when I watch the BBC and when I listen to The Guardian and when I read The Guardian, The Independent and Sky News, etc., on Venezuela, according to them, and if I was to read them, I'd certainly get the impression that their elections are rigged, they're a dictatorship, they're all bad, socialism has basically ruined the country, it's nobody else's fault but theirs, and basically we're meant to go in there and save the day, and that's the situation. However, from my reporting and from the people that I've actually read, I get totally a different scenario in my head come back, because I've got hold on a minute, these elections are the freest and the fairest probably in the world, and actually there's people like Jimmy Carter, ex-president Jimmy Carter, who've testified to that. And then when you actually look at the fabric of the country and you start going outside the normal realms of Western media, and you start looking at other people who have been there to the country, you get a totally distinct, different view. For instance, if you look at Western media, you get the view that it's a very culturalized country, it's very modern, it's very Western. But then when you actually speak to other people, no, it's not that at all, and you're getting a very tainted, very almost racist view of the country there, and it's very one-sided, because actually the country is quite large. And it's very diverse, and it's got a huge population that is indigenous to the country out there in the barrios. And what this Bolivarian revolution has done is it's brought democracy to the country, whereas it didn't have it before. And the rich people are really not too happy about this because they're losing money. Now, please, John, you've been there for the last for 3 weeks, I think you went there.
3 weeks,
Which is right? Am I right sitting here in my council flat getting about £1,000 a month doing what I'm doing, or is the BBC and The Guardian and the Independent right, and the New York Times? Who is right here, John?
It's unfortunately for the case of the corporate media, you're absolutely correct. When I actually arrived, I mean, if you read what I wrote about Venezuela before I actually went, you'll see that I was very sceptical and critical of the Western media's kind of representation of the country anyway. But in the first few days after arriving, I was thinking I'm not actually sure what to write about kind of daily life here, because I just thought nobody's going to believe how the kind of normalcy of day-to-day life that people are kind of getting up, they're going to work. At this point, this wasn't during the times of the blackouts, and I was just thinking if I which I did, if I kind of try and present what's actually going on in this country, people will really struggle to believe this, because they've just been inundated with misrepresentations, with falsehoods, for weeks, not even weeks, for years on end, about Venezuela, about what's going on inside the country. You know, this kind of drip feed of propaganda that leaves you with the exact perception that you described, that it's a country that's suffering a brutal dictatorship, that's held up by these private armed groups, that it's suffering a humanitarian crisis, that people are dying on the streets of hunger. So yeah, I mean, as you said, on the subject of democracy, if you just look over the sea to France, I mean, there's never been spoken about in the media whatsoever. And you've got people, you've got the police beating people nearly to death week in, week out. Those are scenes that I just did. Those types of scenes of, you know, a country in complete political crisis, where kind of people are hitting the streets in violent conflicts every weekend. That I just didn't see any evidence of that whatsoever. Secondly, I mean, the opposition was free to protest. In many cases, they didn't even bother to show up, and when they did, they'd gone home by lunchtime, which is another reason why I struggle to believe that this renewed attempt today will work, because there's so little public enthusiasm for the opposition, especially the Popular Will opposition party. Yeah, and when you talk about culture as well, it's quite funny when you see in the Western media, you see, I forget what I think it was Art World that published this article that was saying, the Maduro regime is allowing Picasso paintings to wilt during the blackout because they're not being kept properly, and as a result, culture is dying. I mean, it just represents what the Western media perceives as culture itself, which is this elite version of what culture is. But when you actually go there, I mean, there's so many different forms of grassroots cultural organisation that's kind of largely organised by collectivos that are incidentally completely demonised within the Western media.
Let me ask you this, John. You
Yeah.
say that there. You say that there's aspects of the culture there that we don't see. Now, Western journalists going there, for instance, journalists from CNN, journalists from BBC, journalists from the Guardian, etc. Would they see what you saw based on the fact that they just stop in totally different places to what you stopped in, didn't you?
Yeah, and I mean, on the subject of CNN, they don't just stop in different places. They're brought. I mean, they're embedded. They're often embedded within the U.S. military. I mean, Nick Valencia. Don't recall if you saw him reporting for CNN. He was stood in front of the military plane, supposedly carrying humanitarian aid, that brought him to the border with Venezuela, and started just rifling on about how there was a complete absence of goods. There was no toothpaste. There was no toothbrushes in Venezuela. And then you've got another kind of another layer of how the Western journalists don't really engage in with normal ordinary people, or at least the poorest people in Venezuela. There was an NPR article that said, it's extremely. We tried to plough the depths of Chavismo, to create this kind of image that you have to really go deep down into this dark pit to get to people who support the government. I think that journalist managed to speak to three altogether. And now if you go to anywhere in the west of Caracas, I mean, you literally just have to leave the house, and people speak to you, especially if you've got a camera out. I mean, they're so aware of how bad the media's coverage of the country is that they'll literally speak to you. They'll be like, please, please, can you report truthfully about what's going on? I mean, street vendors will say, we're struggling. Many people are struggling, for sure. However, I mean, we're not starving of hunger. We're not dying of hunger.
Yeah, they're not dying of hunger. They know how the West is. Obviously, the Western media are portraying this. But, for a dictatorship, that 90% of the media in Venezuela is against him as well, isn't it? Did you find evidence of that when you were over there?
Yeah, large parts of the media are against him. And if you go on the vast majority of radio stations, for instance, you'll hear them saying, can I swear on this?
Yes, you can.
Oh, yeah, okay.
This is YouTube, John. This is YouTube. Right, this is not the fucking BBC, mate.
I don't know what audience we got. No, but you hear people say, "My daughter, fuck your mother," calling his mother all sorts of names. I mean, it's not just that there are wide parts of the media that are free to criticise the government. They're just mouthing off about his family, personally insulting him. Which is fine, but I mean, it's evidence that
it's not a dictatorship.
Yeah, I mean, the main evidence that it's not a dictatorship is that you see Guaido for maybe, I think this is the fourth time that he's been consistently trying, but this is kind of like the fourth time that he's tried to urge a military uprising in the country. Now, if you imagine that happening in the UK or the US, so imagine that Nancy Pelosi, for example, asks Russia to help her, overthrow the government with the help of the US military. I mean, she'd likely already be dead.
Yes.
If not awaiting execution.
Yeah, she would be a traitor, wouldn't she? She'd be calling for an overthrow of her own government. She'd be dead within,
Yeah, and I mean, all the Venezuelan government has done thus far to Guaido, as far as I'm aware, has banned him from public office for just 12 years, which is wildly light punishment, if you ask me. I mean, that's obviously a tactical move, because if they do anything more serious, then the US will use that as justification that they're restricting democracy, or they've locked up our man in Venezuela. So he'll become this kind of symbolic prisoner, a little bit like Leopoldo Lopez did. So I mean, it's obviously a tactical move, but at the same time, it's evidence that this isn't a dictatorship.
If you like this video and you want to see more, please subscribe and click the bell below so you get a notification of when I drop further videos. If you click the links on the screen and below this video through to my website as well, you can find out ways to support me. I can't do this without your help, and I really do appreciate it. Thanks very much for your support, and until next time, peace and take care.